Fat Boys, that was week 12 in the books. But before I get talking about football, let's address the mustached elephant in the room. I know most of you, if not all of you, have seen me like this before, and sometimes it's glorious and sometimes it's sad. I gotta say, the amount of gray in the old mustache and in the beard was definitely a sobering sign as to why we do this. And at the school I'm currently in, it did force me to have conversations with some students who maybe aren't the same age as us. So I'd like to say it to some people my own age. You know the reason why people grow these things. It's to talk about maybe getting ourselves checked out. As men, we don't tend to want to admit to weakness, or when we have an itch, we scratch it, but maybe we should also get it checked out. So, folks, I hope you're thinking about that because I think we know we are all at that age where it's probably better than not. Anywho, enough about that stuff and enough about my glorious mustache, because football happened. Week 12 happened. We should probably talk about it. One would think, considering when I'm recording this, editing this, and you might be watching it, I could steal the Thanksgiving and talk about what I'm thankful or not thankful for. I guess maybe because I'm looking at myself right now, I don't know if I will be as thankful as I will be on Saturday and Sunday when I can actually shave. But also, I don't know if I'm super thankful for week 12. It was our first of two non-consecutive Buyapaloozas where 6 teams sat out because the NFL hates us and doesn't want us to play fantasy, apparently. But the games weren't necessarily great. I'll call them old school, which doesn't mean that old school football stunk. And this weekend didn't stink. There was a few performances, but just some of the trends. I mean, when I think old school, I remember growing up being told that you play your division twice and you're probably going to lose your home or lose away, win home, split, and then see how you do. That was kind of this week, and except for Miami, New England, most of the divisional games were actually either kind of close or kind of important. So even if it was the 10-pointers like Denver and Vegas, or, Seattle upsetting Arizona, you either kind of had the game that you didn't expect or slightly closer than you thought you'd expect. And I think you look at Tennessee, Houston, that's a good example. We had the Snow Bowl with Cleveland upsetting Pittsburgh. We had the OT with Minnesota and the Bears. But obviously the game that kind of highlighted this was Washington just putting up a stinker with Dallas. And if you actually watch that game and not just the end, it wasn't awesome. And especially if you had Daniels or McLaurin, they did nothing until the end. Daniels a little bit earlier, but if it wasn't for that 80-plus yarder with just horrendous Swiss cheese Dallas defense, those guys would not have been on the scoreboard. And then, of course, we get the folly of the missed extra point and then the return touchdown, and things go crazy. So it was entertaining, but I wouldn't necessarily say that was great. I think also when I think of old school in this week, I'm thinking of the running backs, and it's probably a trend I'm not going to speak too much on right now because it will likely be something I mention at the end when I do kind of the big recap. But the wide receivers that were supposed to be super consistent just haven't been, and knock on everything, most running backs have actually stayed healthy this year. Even the ones at the beginning, all the fantasy experts were telling you, stay away from Henry and Jacobs and Barkley, and you can try not to laugh as I'm saying that for a week like this. 7 different running backs had over 20 carries, and that is old school. Even in the Snow Bowl, as I mentioned with Cleveland, Chum didn't have a lot of yards, but he did have 2 touchdowns. And of course, Barkley looks like the league MVP if they actually gave it to MVPs and not just best quarterback with 300 plus. But there's a ton there that aren't slouches and are actually getting us more points than they were supposed to, as opposed to the wide receivers, which are not really doing so well. I think this also kind of makes me think that we are in a weird spot where we only have a couple weeks left. And so I'm going to save my every pick matters because you're going to hear it 5 or 6 times when I go over the league results. But I also think it's important for us to know what teams might be thinking. You can't really blame a team for maybe even starting to tank at this point. Look at the Giants this year. Last year, they put in Tommy DeVito. They should have lost a bunch of games. Instead, they beat Carolina, New England, and the Washington Seawards. All 3 of them jumped ahead. Remember, Carolina pick, actually Chicago pick. Those 3 picks end up being franchise potential quarterbacks. Whereas the Giants go a different route, it doesn't look like they're taking themselves seriously. Barkley leaves for, I think they're going to get a 5th or maybe a 6th round pick. And if that makes you a little upset, look what McCaffrey got not that long ago. Barkley's not necessarily McCaffrey, but he's one of the best in the game and probably should be going for more than a 5 or a 6. Then this year, they're underperforming, or actually probably adequately performing. Danny Dimes gets dumped, and now they're in another rebuild when they could have really rushed it last year, and they had more quarterbacks. Even if they didn't get top 3, they technically passed on a few other quarterbacks who are looking pretty decent. So as upset as we can get in fantasy, you really have to watch and see, is the team that I'm in, are they all in this week? It's really tough. You can't really tank in football, but you can certainly take people out a little bit earlier. So just an FYI, don't get too upset because we're in for a couple weeks where in most of these leagues, it is going to come down to that start and sit decision. Speaking of this week, I really do want to get ahead of myself because it's an exciting one. We have 3 Thanksgiving games, a Black Friday game, and then the rest of the week. Like I said, everything's going to be pretty electric, but let's put a pause on that because we are not ready to talk about week 13 yet. We haven't even talked about week 12 yet. So let's get to that and our personal league scores. We had our extremes this week. We're going to talk about a match that came down to a fractions of points. This one, not so much. This was kind of over at kickoff in a lot of ways. And even though some of the points did come late, they just kind of came all the time. Placenta. Justin, well done. You're in that spot of in the middle of the pack. Big wins actually mean even more. Not only you get the W, 140 is great on the resume. You did have our quarterback 5 overall. I mean, he's been your guy, but Sutton's also kind of been your guy. Whenever you start him, he was a wide receiver 2, and he's becoming a favorite. I'm going to just quickly mention your other receiver who could not catch a ball to save his life. Don't blame you playing against the Baltimore. Normally a deep threat works. Not this case. But let's be honest, we're just stick handling around it. Yeah, you had the defense too in Houston, but you also had 48 points from one single running back. So that probably did it. I don't know, not a mathematician, but I'm pretty sure it is. On the other side of the coin, though, Chaz, you didn't have a great week overall. You definitely had some players overperform. It's nice to see HN getting back into the swing of things and Cup being everything that you kind of wanted him to be a little bit earlier. But a little bit of disappointment from your top end there. Didn't get a few of your big guys, but honestly, save it for the future because here's the thing. You're in 10th, and you might be mathematically out of it, but not technically yet. I think you still technically have a shot. I mean, just because something's unlikely doesn't mean it's not going to happen. I mean, like, I'm unlikely to get any action with the mustache, but yeah, no, I'm just not going to get any with this mustache. But you still might win. So you got to win out, though. I think one more loss, you're definitely mathematically out of it. Justin, huge win to keep in the top 5 here. Let's see how you do next week. Ben, you survived the second half of your namesake here being on a bye with Burrow out. Why? Because Bo Nix, legit. I'm going to say it and you're going to laugh, but you sure you want to take him out next week? I know you're getting your boy back, but man, Nix has been a stud. You were someone who definitely benefited from McLovin. While he did not technically come in top 5 in this particular leave settings, he was 6th, and he went from 0 to hero. If we actually take a look at the math, had he not, he's worth more. That play was worth more than 15 points. So that actually technically could have won this thing for John had it gone another way. That's also assuming, though, that they got no points on that situation. So just something to think about. Ben, you also kind of did round it out here. Now, he's our tight end 2 performance, but we didn't have our tight end 1. No one's taken Gray, even though he's gotten 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. So just saying, some people need tight ends sometimes. Maybe not this week, but whatever. John, it wasn't a completely bust. You were over your predicted. You did have some great wide receivers in our wide receiver 1 in Addison. Awesome performance. And AJ was our wide receiver 5 on the week. But unfortunately, you just couldn't make up for the fact that he had a few people go off, but your running backs just honked all the butts. Dobbins getting hurt certainly doesn't help. Denver's running back situation, flip a coin and take your best shot is kind of what they're going with right now. However, we can't really blame you. There wasn't a whole lot. Both teams were almost going fully commando on this one. So the fact that you put over your predicteds during a bye week was actually pretty impressive. But you don't need pretty impressive. You need wins at this stage, and you are not out of it. We're going to look at the table. As always, it's going to go down to the last week or two, but this would have been a big win for you. Ben, this was a big win for you. You're right in the middle of the hunt, and you certainly have control of your own destiny, which is all we can hope for at this stage in the game. Speaking of another pretty big win, this was a huge one for me to kind of keep up because I do have some issues coming up in terms of matchups, etc. But Kevin, you did need this one as well, so similar to the last story, you're not out of it, but this would have been a monster one. You just didn't show up this week. Gino underperformed for you. Your boy Jefferson has just been hot and cold recently, which kind of sucks. I was really scared of the Tracy matchup, but I don't know why, because apparently just the Giants really do suck. Jacobs was there for you. He's been your guy, running back 2 on the year, and just a bummer when you get a negative on the defense. For me, one of my claims to fame, I mean, Chubb scoring the 2 touchdowns is great, but he didn't crack the top 5. I did also benefit from that massive play by Washington. Daniels was the QB1. And He was the kicker 3 and Dicker the kicker, but he was our kicker 1 because nobody else had a kicker in the top 7, I don't think, except for me. So yay for me, pretty big win. Gonna need to keep the ball rolling. Kev, like I said, you know you're gonna fight to the end anyway, but you still do have a puncher's chance. You know, this is why Jake stays on top. Not on this week. B took him down, and huge win, B. You needed it, top 6. We'll look at that in a second. But the reason I say this is because Jake was very quick to tell me that of his 4 wins, this was his second Monday Night Miracle disaster that ended just shy. So he's only lost a couple this year, and at least half of them have been by a very minuscule margin. I don't know if this minuscule, though. 0.16, my math teacher told me, is a small number in general, especially when you consider coming into the Monday Nighter. If people were paying attention, it was Ladd McConkey on one side, Herbert on the other, had about a 6.16 point advantage for Jake, but unfortunately for him, those extra couple yards from Herbert, probably, to be honest, if we had to break it down, the rushing touchdown, which could have gone to one of his awesome running backs, which some of us would have appreciated, possibly in other leagues, but be appreciated in this week because that was fantastic. If you look at his roster in general, only the tight end 3 was his only player to kind of crack that elusive top 5 in our positions. And we look on the other side, it was still pretty similar with only Gibbs with the running back 5. So this match, they both were at in one case and well over in another. Their predicteds, it was just squeaking out as much. I apologize, actually, just seeing it now. This is also our quarterback position. We did have Mahomes go nuts. You also cracked it. He was our quarterback 3. Apologies on that one. But if we take a look at the bench, this, I mean, you hate to kind of show it this way because, yeah, if Baker would have been put in, it wouldn't have been quite as close. But if Smith and Jigba was in for Stevenson, which, Jake, I got to think you at least thought about that one. Ifs, buts, candy nuts, tight ends different, all that mess. But it was what it was. And let's be honest, Jake, you didn't need the win. You're already in. But I know you want that top spot because you want what that entails both bye week and financially. But B, you were fighting hard for this one. You're going to have to keep fighting because we don't necessarily need to win out if we're in the playoffs, but you certainly want to because there's people right up the backside. Speaking of one individual that is up your backside, that is our 7th place. That's V. Tough loss. You really needed this one. That would have helped you out. And you did look at times when we looked at this matchup like you might pull this one out. Some of his guys were not going off. His running backs, though, and Marks at least performed well enough to get some points. Jonnu Smith was the tight end 3, though, and that was pretty pivotal. Will, you had Pollard as the running back 5, but here's the thing that sucks. It wouldn't necessarily have completely saved it. But you did have Bucky go off on the bench. He was the running back 3 on the week, but this was a commando-based league. There wasn't a whole lot in either one of your basements, so you kind of threw the kitchen sink at it. Mark, it benefited you because maybe you would have gone for Pitts over Smith, and that might not have been quite as good, whereas who knows where Hall and Higgins are going these days. So either way, Mark, huge win for you. Top 2 is what you need to be if you want that bye. You know there's a couple people right there, so this one's going to come down to the wire in terms of even if you make the playoffs, or likely will, what spots people fall into. V, you know it. You're fighting for it. You want this. You can't put up an 81, not in Week 12. Week 13, we expect a little bit better because you are certainly not out of it, but you're going to need some big last 2 weeks. As I said, I think technically everyone's still in the fight, and certainly we know there's a lot of people just one game out. Currently 500 is enough to keep you in. Let's see if 500 will keep you in this with 2 weeks left. Now more than ever, this matters. I think you already know who you're playing, but just in case you waited for this video to find out, well, you missed waiver wires. Horrible idea. Just horrible. But here are our matchups. I'd say not just because I'm in it, but a 3 versus 4 is probably our biggest matchup. 2 playoff teams trying to cement their way in. I think with a win, it is very likely with 1 week left, we might clinch, or I would think the winner clinches. The loser isn't necessarily out of it, but you're opening up the door to a lot of teams coming in here, and then it's really going to depend on Week 14, so we both want this one. Other than that, we have teams in against teams out, so let's see who wants it more. Is it the team that currently has the spot, or like in Jake's case, just wants to make sure he cements the number 1 overall, or is it the fighting teams trying to earn their spot? And you know what? If you need to take someone down, it's going to have to be a playoff team anyway, so should be tight. We know the drill by now. It's not our first rodeo. We know that American Thanksgiving brings a little bit of sadness because we know that football season's almost done, but also to be grateful for the fact that football playoffs or fantasy playoffs are just about getting fired up. You've heard it all before. We've seen it all even in this video. Every add and drop is going to mean something. Every waiver wire pickup or bench spot is going to mean something. How many points were left on our waiver wire last week? To be honest with you, a ton. Our quarterback 2 was just sitting there. We got a tight end with 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. No one wants a piece of. And like I said, I was the only one in the top 6 or 7 for kickers. So a lot of people's kickers would have been better if you dropped and added pretty much anybody because they were probably better than your kicker. So all those points are going to matter at the end. We know this. We know at this point in time we're going to have 3 games on Thursday, 1 Black Friday, normal Sunday. Sunday or Monday nighter means a little bit more to me. Denver Broncos and Cleveland is a game I saw live years ago on a Thursday. So that's our Monday nighter. After that, maybe 1 or 2 more teams will have clinched. Maybe 1 or 2 more teams might be out of it. So a lot to happen in the next, I don't know how many hours, but exciting times. I do wish you the best. And to all the Americans, happy Thanksgiving.